It's not started yet.
So they already have it broken down in the stages.
And welcome to our wonderful new podcast, which is called...
Whatever the heck we want to call it. I don't know.
Is that going to be the abbreviation? What was the abbreviation that Danny had for the podcast at Aunt Mary's house? Very unprofessional way to start. Whoever happens to stumble upon my YouTube channel because they're like friends on my Google account or something, be really confused about what's going on.
That'd be hilarious.
I think you should turn off your camera because your camera is like just a picture.
Turn off my camera?
Yeah.
Be gone.
I think we do not have good enough internet. I think, in theory, ideally you guys would be hosting because you have much better internet than we do.
So, like, if I sent the invite, it would have been better quality?
Yeah, but there are things we need to set up to do so beforehand, and then it would go to your YouTube account, and you would need to be the one to rip the audio file if you wanted to just have an audio file. But it's not bad. It's easy.
Okay, cool.
All right. But for right now, we probably need to stick to just audio because you were starting to become a slideshow.
Okay, well, it's not like it really matters too much, but that sounds good.
Well, that's true, but I think the audio is slideshowing along with you.
Oh, I feel you. I feel you. Okay.
Yeah. All right, so off to a very unfocused start for our podcast. Do you have a podcast voice? Do you speak differently when you know that your voice is going out onto the interwebs live?
I feel like I should, but I also feel like I don't.
You could just put on a very consistent English accent, and when this podcast becomes famous and you have thousands of fans and they meet you in person, they'll be really confused.
I totally should do that.
I thought you were going to say that sentence in an English accent. I was really disappointed.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm not mentally in the place that I need to be to do a British accent for however long we're going to discuss something right now.
Hello, Governor.
That was beautiful, Grace. I don't know how you achieved that tone quality.
That was Trey.
I know.
Okay. Good.
Hello, Governor. You should definitely do a Cockney accent to play with the stereotype of English accents talking about philosophy, but at the same time being the lower class version.
And then we can have a whole discussion about linguistics, and we can have Sarah on about the ethics of championing one dialect over another as better or smarter. Yeah,
I think to lead up to this, like, the first time we do that, you're going to have a posh English accent, and we're going to keep it consistent for several episodes, and the next time you switch to a Cockney accent, and you keep it consistent until we have Sarah on again. And every time she comes on, you switch accents.
That sounds like a lot to remember. I think I can do it.
Well, but when we get on, before we go, I also have a little sticky note that says, Grace is in Cockney accent right now, until Sarah comes back.
That could work. Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to do a British accent tonight. I'm sorry.
That's going to disappoint our 0 viewers.
That's fine. Well, Trey's here.
Are you guys going to start the first podcast tonight, the pilot, the first run, the test run, the initial one, the space run, yeah?
This is round -1. Podcast 0 is going to be setting things up, and then podcast 1 we're actually going to do the podcast, but this is podcast -1 because we have no idea what we're doing.
Yeah. So obviously we have no idea what we're doing because we haven't even talked about what we're supposed to be talking about tonight, which is we are going to speak on the Heinz dilemma, which was the topic picked by Grace, which I will pick the next topic, or we might revisit this one and I'll pick the next topic depending on how this goes. But we'll see. Yeah. So I'll give a brief overview. It probably won't be very brief, but it's fine. Overview of what the dilemma is. So the Heinz dilemma is a very popular dilemma used to discuss ethical decision-making. Essentially, the story that is often given is that there's a man whose wife is dying. She has an illness, a very rare illness, that only one doctor has any sort of, or only one pharmacist or whatever has the prescription that can help save her. And so
this guy, he doesn't have a lot of money. He goes to the prescription pharmacist guy and asks him for the prescription to save his wife's life. And the pharmacist says, okay, yeah, sure. It's like $2,000. And when in reality, the pill only costs like $10. And so the husband is like, that seems a little steep. Can I like work for you to work it off or like do some sort of like plan or whatever? And the guy's like, nope, $2,000. Thanks. So this guy can't afford $2,000 to get the prescription. And while he goes home and sort of thinks about his options, he decides to go back that night while the pharmacist is gone and rob the pharmacist and steal the prescription to save his wife's life. And so that's the general dilemma there, is whether or not the husband was in the wrong for stealing the prescription for his wife.
Yes, and the general idea of this would be to have someone answer whether or not he was correct and why, and then from there you'll be able to put them on a kind of scale of where they are in their moral development.
Yeah, but we'll get into more detail on the specific moral development, but I kind of want to talk about the dilemma itself first, because I think this is very... Or, I mean, do you want to talk about the summary first, or do you want to talk about the world?
I think that the talking about, we'll call it the meta discussion of it, would be like the more complex thing, and then the actual act of engaging with the thing head on would be a little bit simpler. So I thought that like the ramping up into the meta discussion would be like the last thing, but the majority of the discussion. So it would be then we would do we would do one or two, like you would explain from different points of view why he would be right or wrong in stealing it.
Sure.
And then we would pretty much be done with that would be like all we would need to do. And then we can go on the meta discussion.
Okay, yeah, no, that makes sense. I was thinking that we would maybe discuss like what you think in the situation.
I agree.
Yeah, so like I say, I kind of just want to talk about the dilemma itself. And like, Tim, do you think that the husband was right to steal? Do you think that was a good thing to do?
Okay, yes, then we were on the same page.
Yes, we just misunderstood.
Yeah, I thought you were going to talk about the dilemma, like whether or not this is a good model. And I was like, well, this is we're jumping right into the depth.
No, right. we gotta wait. We gotta wait our way in.
I do believe that he should have stolen the medicine, because I think that a human life is worth more than property rights, though it can get complicated when you're weighing that action versus like how many, like if that would, let's say, like damage the business so much that they weren't able to provide other life-saving services to other people. So not in all situations, right? Because you can prioritize one life and damage many by dealing with that property value. But in a straightforward, keeping it simple sense, I think it was the right thing to do.
Yeah, I would agree in that. I mean, like firsthand, like face value, I'm like, yeah, a person's more important than money, or like your rights to your ideas, I guess. Well, actually, yeah. But I think it's interesting because I feel like there are a lot of whenever I've discussed this with people always think of different ways that like it could have been avoided. And obviously it could have been, I think I threw in the idea that he kind of bargained a bit. And I don't know if that's actually part of the real dilemma or if that was just me adding some speculation. But I know in discussions there's been speculation where, well, what if he just like said that he could work it off? Or what if he made a deal with the pharmacist? Or what if he gave more detail about his situation? Maybe the pharmacist would have understood or whatever. But I guess the argument is that you can't really speculate on any of those situations, and like what happened is what happened per se.
Yeah. And I also think that makes it less useful as a mental model or exercise of it, because like, of course, there could be others. Like, those are all variables that we would be making up. So It doesn't really matter. The question is, if the pharmacist was a hard line, like, I don't do deals, like, you pay me the money or it doesn't get done, I think that makes it more useful in talking about the morality of what happened than 1 bajillion what ifs. It's like, well, what if he knew the daughter of the pharmacist and he wooed her and cheated on his wife to get the drugs? Is that more wrong? Because he cheated on his wife. And it just like gets really, you can go down the rabbit hole of what ifs, because I mean, they're all unconstrained.
I would say, like, if you do the comparison thing, like, he could have just killed the pharmacist and taken him. That would have been a whole other
thing. Who would offer that solution over stealing? Stealing is wrong. He should have killed him instead.
I mean, it would have solved more problems, I guess, but created more at the same time. But.
Yeah, and then they would also have to hold the view that taking from a person who is recently killed is not stealing. Which is that I don't think that's true. I think it's still stealing if you just murdered them and you take their stuff. I think it's probably worse.
I think it's definitely worse.
Well, just the act of stealing, like not the death. Like if the person died of natural causes and you immediately start taking all their stuff, is that worse or better?
I think it's better than murdering them. Well, I guess it depends on your.
Well, no murder. So you're not doing any murder. Is stealing from a dead person better? A recently murdered person better than stealing from a living person?
That's a really good question.
If you don't murder them.
Think about it like consequentially. Like there are going to be less consequences in terms of taking away from somebody else, if that makes sense. But then there's also the concept of like, who was this meant to be for? Like if they had someone written in their will that like this person was supposed to get this thing and that thing, and people were like banking on that. I guess it depends on the level of value of what you're stealing.
And I think there's also like a cultural kind of like sacredness of the passing of a life, where like you're like, dude, he just died. Like, he doesn't need it, but he just died.
Well, yeah, that's what I was gonna say next. Was that even if it's like not gonna make much of a difference, is the respect of
symbolically, you don't want people to be stealing from dead people as soon as they get killed.
Yeah.
All right.
Well, that reminds me of a story in Les Mis, and Thénardier. He's basically robbing the battlefield after a battle and taking all of the dead soldiers' stuff and like their pocket watches and stuff. He accidentally comes across someone who's not quite dead yet, and he saves their life.
Not quite dead yet. Yeah.
So it could be a good thing, maybe.
This is good because it's a total tangent, but it has a lot of interesting questions in it, because you're saying that by stealing from the recently deceased, he had a chance to find people who were on death's doorstep and save their lives.
Yeah.
But that's happenstance, right? So that's just because that happened doesn't mean that it was likely to happen or justify the stealing of the things.
I don't think it justified the stealing, but had he not been there, then that person would not have been discovered. They would have just been left to like probably bleed out.
That begs the question, does his intent change? Is he like, I'm going to steal all this stuff? He would never do this, but I'm going to steal all this stuff just in case someone's still injured.
And that is a really good question, because like intent is actually kind of important in this situation, because I mean, obviously we know, or we can sort of know the intent of the husband. He obviously wants to save his wife, but is that more selfish because he's like attached to her as far as like romantically, or is he acting differently than he would if it was just any other sick person? Like everyone else has to pay the $2,000 to get that pill,
Yeah. And
so.
That's a good point. And I also think, when you're talking about intent, does the husband's like mindset when he steals the drugs make a difference? Like what if he like does it with spite? Like he's like, okay, so you're preventing this drug from people. I'm gonna do this to spite you, and I'm gonna take this drug even though you said I couldn't. Or is it like, if it's completely like, I really regret doing this, but I need to for my wife, does that make a difference in the morality of the situation? Like if he's reveling in it, or if he's regretfully doing it?
See, I think that's it's hard to discuss, because I feel like morality is such a action-based, like concept. It doesn't like, you might have seen someone who's about to get robbed, but like if you didn't stop it, then you didn't stop it, you know? Even if you were thinking, oh man, that's rough, that's not a good thing, someone should do something about that, you know?
Well, here's a counterexample. If you're watching someone get robbed and you're like, man, I would really like to help them, but I'm scared to, or you think, yeah, go get him, robber. Like, is that one, that sounds more morally dubious, even though you're not taking an action. Like,
I mean, yeah, but I think,
like
I guess,
you're sitting there like, this is gonna be good. Let me get the popcorn.
I mean, I think intent does matter, and I think it matters for like me personally. It would matter how I feel about the situation. Like if I knew that the husband was just being like, "F you, pharmacist, this is just because you're being mean to me. I don't actually even care about the real end consequence." But then him being like, "I really want to help people. You're a bad guy," you know?
Yeah.
But I do think that for the sake of discussion of morality and ethical decision making, you can't really include that in the discussion, or else it's going to be like you were saying, like a rabbit hole of
of what if.
If that, yeah.
That's true. I think in the actual application of Heinz dilemma, that's not useful. It's like it's like a nice, interesting like tangent that you can go on that could be its own discussion.
Yeah, definitely, for sure.
All right, we've gone way off in the weeds. We barely discussed what our reaction to the actual dilemma was.
Well,
so,
yeah.
What was your take on whether or not he was correct or not, and why?
So, my personal take is very similar to yours, I guess. I mean, I don't know how deep you went into yours, but essentially, I think that human life is more important than the monetary value of like someone's idea or someone. You know what I'm saying? Like,
yeah.
The reason this pharmacist was able to charge $2,000 is because he was the only one who had it. He created it himself, so he had the creative license, I guess, to charge that much. But I feel like a human life is slightly more important than that.
That's true. There's a one harder is not like intuitive for humans to imagine, but if we change the situation slightly to where that $2,000 was going to R&D for another drug that could save other lives,
right?
Does that change the situation substantially? Like, even though there's one more concrete life to be saved, like the stealing of the medicine is like actually contributing to the harm of other people's chances to live.
Yeah, like I'm thinking like maybe like so this prescription was technically the cure for this disease, but maybe they were working on like a vaccine, you know, or something like that. Same one by touching it so high. Exactly.
Or if you extrapolate the behavior. So like it's okay for him to do this one thing, but if that's okay, does that mean it's okay for anybody who has ill spouse who can't afford the medicine to rob the hospitals? And if that's the case, a lot of people would die because the hospitals will go out of business because they get like systematically robbed by everyone who can't afford the drugs.
That's
so
true.
then like more people die because now it's okay. Like in a sense, it can't, even though that one act is okay, it can't be okay in a general sense, because then worse things happen to more people.
Yeah.
Because then it's a free-for-all on the hospitals.
Yeah.
You're poor, I'm like, can't afford the drugs, but I can afford a shotgun. Let's go.
I mean, yeah, you can also like change any one of these like these details in the dilemma of like, well, what if it wasn't $2,000? What if it was just like $10 and this guy just didn't have that and he was just like a poor person in general, you know?
Real rough situation to not have $10.
But like, yeah. But like, does that change it? Like, does your concept of his act change? Because I think $2,000 seems more unattainable. So the robbery you can kind of empathize with the robbery a little bit more or sympathize with the robbery a little bit more.
Yeah, because you're like, I don't have $2,000.
You're like, you could probably find that on the street somewhere, or like go through your couch cushions and get some change, and eventually you'll get there. Like, I feel like that's an interesting discussion.
Yeah, I think even without what ifs, the applying of, even though it was like, I feel that it was right for Mr. Husband to do this one time. If I universally said that was right, even with all those things to say, no with what ifs. Like, if I said this is the correct course of action when you're in this scenario,
yeah,
I feel like it would end up in more harm.
Yeah. But I think also if you just extrapolate, if you just like kind of distance yourself from the situation itself, like you can say universally human lives take precedent over what we might consider like wrong or right judicially, right?
Yeah.
Like, yeah.
That's like the principle that's definitely agreeable upon. It's like the human fundamental difficulty in understanding like this like nice case scenario. It's nice wrapped up. We see the life like relationship to the drug immediately versus if everyone did this, like how bad it would be. But that's still working on the same principle that you mentioned. Like both of them are within the interest of human lives are more important than the money.
Yeah.
Right. Necessarily, but then there's the whole question of how complicated does the system get when we say this is correct to do.
Right. I also think that like we're missing a sort of dimension because I don't think we're talking about the law side of it. So like, does law govern what is right or wrong? I know how we're both going to answer this, but I think some people would say like he should not have stolen because stealing is wrong. But also to take it to another level, if he steals and then he gets caught for the theft, then he's probably going to be in prison. He's probably going to have to return the stolen goods, and therefore his wife probably suffers even further.
Yes.
And that's a little devil's advocate over there, like because there's a penal system that we have in place, like that could be an even worse situation.
That's true. I think that's definitely good to talk about because we've only been hanging out in like the stage 5 and 6,
right?
And that touches on a lot of those without having to be like, this is the reason why he did it. But do the consequences of like first let's address law because you asked does law matter, and I think it should, but it's so imperfect that it's hard because usually it doesn't.
Right.
So like. The idea of law is good because of what I was talking about earlier. Systematically, if what he did was right, then more people would suffer. So law is super important, and it would be a worthwhile moral compass if it wasn't so flawed. But we have a very complex, some great, some terrible system. So sometimes it's morally correct to disobey the law, and other times, even if it benefits somebody, it's morally incorrect to disobey the law.
Right.
So it's complicated because real world.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's why we have our, judicial system. Someone to judge your wrongdoings to maybe there's a justification for why you broke the law. But I was going to say something and I lost my train of thought. Yes, you make a great point, Tim.
Thank you. I was agreeing. Yeah, I pretty much agree with your viewpoint.
Right.
I wanted to say that when you said whether or not he would go to jail or not, does that come up in the question of, like, does that matter to you in the question of morality at all? Like, I'm assuming he's, like, taking it into account, but does it make a difference in whether or not the morality of him stealing from the pharmacist matters? Well, it might have been a bad plan.
Yeah, I think that takes us to another level as well if we're moving down to 1 and 2 in regards to just like punishment essentially. Anyway, let me see if I can find the, yeah, here we go. So like I would think that makes a difference if he was trying to avoid that. Like some people think that, oh, he shouldn't have stolen because then he would get punished for it. Like punishment avoidance.
Yeah, that's one of the stages that we haven't enumerated fully yet.
Right. Exactly. So like I feel like that's definitely something to take into account. And I think the way I was going, like the way I was approaching that was just the consequence idea. Essentially like if this happens, then this could likely happen, and that could likely happen, and that could likely happen. And of course there are people who argue that that's like no way to live your life, but but I mean it's definitely something to think about if you're thinking like real life instances, and obviously this one isn't.
So,
I
would say even if you were in stage 1, because you're not, Do you think that the consequences after the fact would affect the morality of the decision in the first place?
I don't think it actually affects the morality, no.
Okay, but that is like in the meta discussion of the Heinz dilemma, which we want to move to eventually, it's like stage 1 and 2 are almost like misunderstanding where the moral dilemma even is.
Right.
It's like, it's not, the moral dilemma is in whether or not the stealing was wrong, but when you're in that stage 1, you're not even thinking about stealing from the guy. You're just thinking about what happens afterwards.
Right, you're thinking about whether or not you're going to get punishment or like something good is going to happen, you know?
Yeah, you don't even understand the
like obviously
distraction.
So someone might say if their reasoning is that, or if they might say that he's correct in stealing it, but their reasoning might be they're right because he's going to save his wife. That would be even on the lower spectrum.
Yeah.
Because they're not thinking on the universal level. They're thinking on like the situational.
Yeah, in that one situation, they're not thinking human life is worth more than property rights. They're thinking his life is more than the $2,000.
Exactly. Yeah. So I guess we're kind of dancing around the actual application of a theory to this dilemma. We haven't actually defined the theory or anything like that. So I feel like that might be worth doing.
We like to keep our zero viewers on their toes about what's actually happening.
What stages? What are you talking about?
Stage 2. I don't know what stage 2 is.
So basically, there's this. I guess he's a philosopher. I don't know what he is actually. He might be a psychologist, but
we have a specialist here who might know. No, our specialist doesn't know.
I mean, Kohlberg is a psychologist.
Kohlberg was a psychologist, and he was the one who was talking about the.
If that's what you're talking about.
Yeah, he's the one who was talking about the stages of moral development.
Yes, so Lawrence Kohlberg made this thing called the stages of moral development. Essentially, he wanted to rank where people are on moral development based on how they react to ethical decision making, is what I understand it to be. Like what determines right or wrong for these people.
Our local expert agrees with your understanding.
You think she does?
Yes, I agree.
We got nods from the person who studies this in her master's degree.
Wonderful. I'm happy. Because I did not study this technically.
Winging it off the Wikipedia page.
Well, I mean, I learned about it in multiple.
Yeah, I've learned about it in multiple classes as well, but.
Not specifically for psychology, but it's okay. So basically, there are 6 stages of moral development, and those 6 stages are split up into 3 different groups. So I'll just say the first 3 groups in general. So the general idea is there's the pre-conventional stages of moral development, which ideally would go for the ages up to the age of 9 as far as like personal like lifespan development for people.
Ideally. I said ideally.
Ideally. Conventional would be the next stage, and that's most adolescents to adults. Most people kind of are in here as far as their concept of right and wrong. And then there's post-conventional, which, as it may sound, it's not as conventional. Those are going to be the ones that are going to be about, it says 0 to 15% of the people who are over 20 are at this level of moral development. So to break those down, let's just talk about pre-conventional. This is going to be like what we were saying, stage 1 and stage 2. So stage 1 is punishment and obedience. And there are different terms for this. People kind of have different ways of approaching it, I'm pretty sure, and different ways to sort of explain it. But the general idea is the same. So punishment and obedience was kind of what we were just talking about. So someone might say that the husband was wrong because he would get put in jail if he stole, essentially. So right and wrong is defined by what you get punished for. So this is what you see a toddler, they think that stealing is wrong just because their mom says
they'll get yelled at.
Time out. Yeah. Just because they'll get yelled at. So if you get, so that's like the example that they have here. If you get told off for stealing, then obviously stealing is wrong, which makes sense. So I think a lot of people kind of understand that perspective. The one after that, the second stage, is instrumental or relativist. It's very similar to punishment and obedience, but what's different is by what you are rewarded for and doing what other people want. So it's more motivated about selfishness than like punishment, if that makes sense. And I don't know, Tim, do you want to unpack that at all? Sound like you want to.
I think this is pretty straightforward.
Yeah.
I think it's hilarious discussing so much of these before we describe them.
Yeah, I know.
In the future, we just should describe them first and then discuss them second. But we had too many interesting rabbit holes to go down.
Yeah, I think we just got caught up in the discussion of the dilemma that we wanted to apply it immediately.
Yes.
But
so we apologize again to our 0 viewers. Next time we will explain what we're talking about first. But yeah. All right.
Yeah,
I think you're doing good.
Great. So that's the pre-conventional stage. So that's basically children's level of understanding of what is right and wrong. Oh, that was loud.
Don't worry.
It was a door. So the next stage, as I mentioned before, is the conventional stage. Like I said, this is going to be more adolescents and most adults. The first one in this section, so this is going to be stage 3, is interpersonal concordance. So essentially, this is a yes man, but like in terms of right and wrong. So being good is whatever makes other people happy. There's a conformist attitude to morality. It's more of like right and wrong is just what everyone else considers right and wrong. And so obviously you're going to do what, everyone else is doing essentially. The one that's also under conventional and is level 4 is law and order, which we also kind of talked about a little bit. This just means you're doing your duty to society. You don't speed because it's against the law. We obey laws without questioning them, and we just show respect for the authority that laws hold. And most adults, according to Kohlberg, most adults don't progress past this stage. I think he's a little cynical about the state of our moral development as humans. I think some people, people go beyond that, hopefully. But yeah, so that's the conventional stage. So there's the interpersonal concordance and law and order. And then that takes us to the post-conventional stage, which is the highest stage, starting with stage 5, social contract. So right and wrong is now determined by your personal values, although they can be overridden by democratically agreed laws. You essentially you follow the laws as long as they coincide with what your personal views are. And if the laws infringe on your own sense of justice, you can choose to ignore those laws. So that would kind of be the concept of my personal sense of justice. This is like what I think is right and wrong. So this would be the husband believed, obviously, it's wrong to charge this much for a drug that can save lives, so I'm going to steal it. And I'm breaking the law to do so because it doesn't coincide with my sense of justice. And then the last one, which is like, if you get here, you're in a good place, is the universal ethical principle. This is living in accordance with deeply held moral principles, which are seen as more important than the laws of the land. So this is like beyond important. These are principles that can be applied to essentially anything. And if the law infringes it, then it's like that law does not matter at all. And yeah, that's pretty much it. That's like the breakdown. So I guess in the land of psychology, and April, you can talk more about this, our resident expert.
Our resident expert is actually currently doing research as we speak.
Wow.
Other topics.
But essentially that's like the progression that you would want to see in like a person over time. So like I said, those little age stages. So the first pre-conventional would be children up to the age of 9. Conventional would be adolescents and adults. And post-conventional ideally is like adulthood. I think psychology has a different perspective on it slightly than like philosophy in terms of ethical decision making. But I don't know, April, do you want to talk about it a little bit?
I honestly wouldn't say that psychology has a different view of it. I just think that they realize how people aren't always in those stages when we expect them to be. So people often are very halted by just little things like not having education, not having money, not having resources. So you expect an adult to be able to reason at an adult level, but psychologists realize that actually people might not, and they might still be in stage 2 of the developmental model. But it's really not very different than what like you would assume. So I think that if a psychologist was looking at the Heinz dilemma, they would still go through it the same way a person normally would.
Or a philosopher.
Or a philosopher would, yeah. Just like realizing that there is such a huge dilemma in it and realizing where a person's at to be able to go through it.
Very true. Very true.
Yeah.
So now that we've sort of discussed what Kohlberg's moral stages are, I kind of want to go into whether or not they're useful to discuss. I mean, either psychological development, like you said, you have to realize that people aren't necessarily going to fit into those stages at specific times. But I also kind of want to talk about there are a lot of holes and gaps that I feel like obviously no theory is going to be able to fill forever in one go, but it's something worth discussing. So, Timothy, do you have anything that you feel holds this sort of concept back? This is a quiz.
Hello?
Hello?
We lost audio for a little bit, but I heard your last question. So we had like 45 seconds of blank time of silence.
That's great. Okay.
What was the last complete thought you had?
I was just saying, I think that this is a cool theory, and it said you left the group chat and then joined and then left and then joined again.
There was connection issues.
But anyway, I was just saying, like, now that we've gone over it and we sort of understand the theory, I think it'd be kind of cool to discuss like how useful it is. And I was just saying, of course, no theory can really get rid of every hole. It's kind of impossible to have one thing that it can be applicable to literally every situation. But I think will be fun to discuss kind of where this specific theory may fall short.
I see. I do have a question for our resident expert. Do you know if this theory is an application that assumes like it's a biological truth of humans at the development stages, or is it taking into account our time and resources in a developed nation as these benchmarks? Because if not, we could talk about that. But it would be nice to know what Kohlberg thought.
I was going to say, based off of what I understand, and again, it could be like super wrong, I think that he acknowledged that you can move ideally upward. I don't think you can really regress once you've reached a certain point, but I don't know if that answers your question at all. But I think I remember in discussion that it's this idea of it's not necessarily set based on like, okay, you're this old, you should be moving on to like this stage.
Well, that's sort of my question. So I have two different meta directions I want to go.
I think where you were asking is if he realized the different like education and all that, like what I brought into it, or if he just has like the idea that like, oh, this is what it is, and not taking into account all the other things.
My question would be, would our pal Lawrence say that the ages would stay the same 3,000 years ago for a human's development?
Like this is a thing that is ingrained in humanity.
Yeah. Is this a human biological like developmental stages, or are they just effective for our current time, and it's our biology tied in a inseparable way from our civilization, our education, and our culture?
I actually don't know.
Yeah, to be honest, I don't know. I know that he did say that it is applicable across cultures. So he does like see it as like
multicultural.
Like a universal thing, but I don't know if he would
maybe not like multi-temporal.
Yeah, because also this came about in like the 1950s, so that's still like the time of like new psychology. So it's just how they viewed things before science really became.
Yeah, it was like before it was very rigorous. Kind of.
Right.
Because it is a mental model, not a scientific hypothesis that's necessarily testable.
Right, and I have the date here. I think it's 1958 when this was, I guess, published. This article on moral development that Kohlberg sort of like put out to the world, and it's a focus on like justice and autonomy and independence. And I don't know how applicable that is in every like if you think cavemen, I guess they'll have a sense of justice.
They'll have a sense of justice. So this is my question to you. This is a meta discussion I think is interesting for the Heinz dilemma. Is this applicable? Well, actually, first, yes or no, do you think this is applicable to modern day people in a useful manner? Maybe not a truthful manner and like universal truth, but do you think it's like a useful model?
I say no.
Okay. Well, let's have that discussion first, and then we'll come back to this theory across time and space.
Well, wait, what do you say?
I say without a better model, I think it's decent. I mean, it does kind of illustrate moving of perspective from completely egocentric to a systematic and universal point of view. I think there are flaws in it, but I mean, aside from a different theory, I still think it has a usefulness. I don't think it's harmful. It might just not be like sleek or efficient.
I guess I may have misunderstood your question. You were asking if it was useful, and I'm like, I mean, not really. Only because...
Oh, not utilitarian?
What?
Not utilitarianly? Like, there's no utility to it?
Right, yeah, like, it can categorize where you stand as a person in your moral development, but also, I mean, I guess it would be useful... I guess we're bringing in psychology a lot, but it's useful for a psychologist specifically in sort of understanding where people are and sort of marking those benchmarks, especially when you're trying to do like childhood development and like just general development.
Yeah, or if you're trying to reason with somebody that might be developmentally halted from this perspective. Like if you're trying to explain why something's wrong, you don't want to go into the universal values of like life versus property rights. You might want to be like, this is bad because this is really bad punishment. Like it can help you interact with people if you can identify where they are on the spectrum.
Yeah, I guess, I mean, but you know, if you do like have a disagreement with someone about something like that, you're not going to say, oh, actually, no, you're obviously on a level 4.
But that would be terrible social skills.
This is what you're coming at it as far as your perspective.
Yeah,
I'm at a different
I think you could apply utility to it. Basically, like recognizing, you might not need to know stages, but recognizing that people have different perspectives when it comes to morality and being able to identify their perspective. Not saying you're a stage 4, but being like, okay, I see how they reason what is right or wrong, and I can engage on their level with this, so I can communicate more effectively. So I think there is a usefulness to that. I mean, I don't think it really needs to be named, but like I said before, aside from a different model, I think for that in terms of engaging with people or checking on their development, it like does a pretty decent job.
Yeah.
I don't think it's totally off the mark.
I agree with that. I guess what I'm thinking is like, did we really have to have, like, do we really need to have a model to understand that? But I guess also we definitely do.
I like that really quick, calm response.
Yeah.
Question.
Well, like,
do we need it? Yeah.
Well, I'm thinking like in my mind, I'm like, okay, well, even before I knew about Kohlberg's moral development, I understood people saw things from different perspectives, and so they're going to have different like ideas of good and bad and right and wrong and whatever. And so I guess from my perspective, it's like, okay, yeah, this is kind of a no-brainer.
It's like a self-evident kind of thing.
Right, but...
Well, I think that's interesting because there are a lot of things that you would say, of course, to, that would still be better served to have a concrete kind of, like, higher level of presence in your mind because it's been more digested.
Right.
You know what I mean? So there's like things that are like obvious. Like actually, I think we should do a episode. Probably episode 0 should be talking about philosophy. What is philosophy? What is knowledge? Because I think that's a super important foundation. Right. And like a lot of those definitions of what knowledge is are so obvious, but bringing that to the forefront of your mind helps erase some of the background radiation of connotations you pick up and like assumptions that are different between people. Like it kind of like calibrates how you think of it. So this is like a nice way to, of course we feel like if someone just only doing things based on punishment, something's wrong, but this helps calibrate your view of it so you can talk about it in a constructive way amongst other people. So for a psychologist it makes sense. Like how can I talk to other psychologists about my patients and where they are in their development?
Definitely. And I do think that you brought up the idea of connotation, which I think is interesting because that's something that I sort of want to apply to the drawbacks of this model specifically. Only because I think it would be hard to avoid this idea of a progressive, like a progression of stages of morality.
Yes.
But I also think that inherently it causes you to believe that, okay, if I'm on stage 4,
I'm doing better.
Then I'm not, like I would rather be on stage 6, or like this person's totally on a stage 2 and I'm killing the game by being better than them morally.
Yes. Always dangerous to divide humans into a progressive class.
Right, exactly. And I think it's unavoidable with like the concept of, since it's
of development, yeah.
Right, but like at the same time, I know the first time I was sort of talking about this theory and the moral development of stages and stuff like that, where I knew where I landed, I think I landed on a 5 instead of a 6 the first time I did the Heinz dilemma. I was like, wait, no, I believe the 6 one more. I think
that sounds pretty good. The best one. Yeah, I think that's what I think.
Yeah, and like I found myself being like, okay, no, actually, totally, I want to be on that level. But where I like actually discussing the Heinz dilemma before I knew the stages, I was on a different level. So
yeah, I agree. I had that same sensation. I think I got a 5 instead of a 6, and I was like, wow. Maybe it is. Maybe I was thinking of universal human life instead of just this one specific instance. But like, well, there's 2 things there. One, is that bad? Right. So in that one very specific interaction is looking at these ways of perceiving morality and seeing one that this one guy considered better, but like I also agree is probably a more useful model of how does this apply to everyone is this universal principle. Like seeing that and being like, oh wait, that does sound really good. Maybe I should try that. Like, is there a downside to instantly changing your point of view? Being like, wait, I like that.
I think kind of what you just said is like, this is also one guy's view of what is considered like the utmost morality that people should strive for.
That's true.
So like,
one thing though, Kohlberg, I think, is the only one that actually has a moral development model. There are no
other ones
that I know of that are well known. Because he came up with it because he saw everybody else using like psychosexual, like Freud, and like biosocial, and all of those, and he was like, wait, you have to take into account moral development too, not just like education and all of that. So he did like, this isn't like a set in stone thing, but he just wanted people to realize that morals are a huge factor to take into account. Yeah.
So yeah, it was bringing awareness to it. It's interesting that's the only model. There's not a newer one.
I'm pretty sure.
I was gonna say, since 1958, we haven't had another concept of moral development, like another model of moral development. I'm sure we've had people like talk about it, like we have.
Yeah.
I think it's probably because it's so self-explanatory almost.
Yeah, it's very broad, which makes it harder to be like, this is wrong, because like it doesn't have 6 unique stages, but it is a pretty wide berth of reasoning. And like it's generally like I think it is kind of intuitive. Like I think he was mostly correct in his ordering of the priorities of those types of reasonings. Like from egocentric to the least egocentric is probably the most useful for society, thus the most beneficial for a mature person to hold those beliefs as they become a bigger part of society.
That makes sense. I was gonna say actually, I think there was. I don't think it's another like development model, but Carol Gilligan was actually a student of Kohlberg, and she developed this idea of ethics of care. So I think I mentioned before that the stages of moral development are based on justice and logic, essentially, like this, then that, etc. This is good, this is bad. But Carol Gilligan, I guess, saw that there is probably more to moral reasoning than the justice perspective. And she basically used the Heinz dilemma to examine responses. And I guess what she saw most was the difference in females focusing on the relationship side. So they're focusing on the fact that, oh, this is someone's like husband and wife, like the relationship and the relationship of the husband to the pharmacist. They would be the ones to bring up, okay, but what if the pharmacist and the husband were friends? And like, what if this person and that person, it would change the dynamics for them? It's basically on just logic and justice. So it's a difference of theme in general, not really gender, but that's just what she saw. And so like there's their perspective of maintaining the needs and meeting the needs of ourselves and of others. And so the importance of relationships over justice. And that's just something that I've come across when I was doing like a leadership studies class, but I found it in my here. But I thought that's something to sort of take note on. It's not necessarily another model as far as development goes, but it's another like
application of it.
Yeah. Taking it kind of basically what Kohlberg did was like, wait, we're not thinking about this now. So like maybe if we like add this to the equation, it'll change things.
That's very true. And then I had another meta question from this tree branch of conversation that happened a while ago.
Sorry.
No, that's okay. It's good that like river of conversation is flowing so smoothly. But do you think that you can be in different stages on different issues at different times?
Oh, yeah.
I think that's one of the failing points because I think in the theory you can't regress, but I know there are times where I am not in a universal state of mind about human principles when I'm thinking of, should I do this? I'm not thinking systematically if everyone did this, how would it turn out? Is this aligning with a universal principle of humanity? You know, I think the morality is more fluid than like the stages lead you to believe.
Well, I think that brings in like the idea of the situational aspect of it. But I also think that, I mean, from my perspective on this is that Kohlberg was essentially trying to like get at the core of someone's reasoning. So like more often than not, this person thinks about punishment, or like, you know what I'm saying? Like when stakes are really high, this person still only thinks about punishment versus, you know, a day-to-day decision to decision sort of moral development.
That's true. I guess if the question comes up, is what you're doing right or wrong? Well, that's the thing is fluid. So I think for me is I have like that. If I'm in a classroom or if I'm talking on a podcast, my stage 6 hat's always going to be on, even like subconsciously. I'm not thinking like maybe I should think stage 6, but like I'll be thinking in these big terms. But in a day-to-day, should I take my coworker's cookie? They won't know. Am I thinking? Am I thinking it won't hurt them that bad? Like that's normal. That's probably more the level of reasoning. I'm gonna be like, it's good for them if they don't eat their cookie.
As I say, maybe you're even helping them a little bit, but
yeah, but it's still not a universal stage reasoning, right? So it's like, based on my environment, I'm much more likely to, if I'm feeling academic, put my stage 6 hat on like every time when I'm like thinking in depth, thinking in like conceptually. But if I'm thinking reaction wise, I think most people aren't operating on that level. Even when if you ask them that question, they answer it because it snaps them into that kind of what is right and wrong. But that might not be the way they live their life. You know what I mean?
Definitely, and I think that's something that should be noted because I was about to say like that's like a good disclaimer for this discussion. Like even though when we analyze this dilemma, choose the best situation, or like we think that it's good or bad based off of level 6, you know, like the ideal. I think that if we're in that situation, like if it was your wife and she needed medicine and this guy was charging a ridiculous amount of money, like what would you do? I think
what would you feel would be justified, even if you wouldn't do it? Like you might be like, I would be justified in stealing that medicine. I don't know if I have the skills to steal the medicine. But if I did, I would.
And I think that also comes up with that like idea of intent, because then that comes to the question, like, even if you didn't do it, like you still thought, like you didn't do it because you would be punished for it, obviously.
Well, yeah, but that's also like, so that's tricky because there is two aspects to this. Whether or not you do it and whether or not you thought it was right are different things. So like, I could think it would be justified, like it would be correct for me to steal this medicine, but I can't because the consequences would lead to worse situations, right? Like, so it's not like that I think it's wrong, it's just like, feasibly, I can't do it.
But I also
think, if I was like, if I was an invisible man who could walk through walls, I would, like, situation.
Well, I also think that's interesting because, like, if you look at the language of stage 6, it's these principles like transcend concrete rules. So, like, if you really were on stage 6, you'd be like, "F the police, we're doing this."
Well, that's true. Like, that's like, even though, so at stage, like, I could be stage 6, I'd be like, I'm reasoning that the human life is a more important value, right? I believe that wholeheartedly. But I know that if I try to steal this medicine, everything will be worse. Nothing will be better. My wife will not be cured. I will be caught, right? So sometimes you know what's right, but you don't have, like, you might not have the means. So that's a different logical thing, right? Like, I could say, I know that's right. I'm still not going to do it, though, because the consequences aren't determining whether or not it's right, but the consequences are determining the odds of me going to jail without getting my wife the medicine and then her having no income at all. Like,
I think, I think that's interesting because, like, I don't know, I was listening to the soundtrack for Hamilton earlier today, so this is obviously...
Of course.
I'm going to reference musicals many a time in these discussions, I'm sure. But...
I need to find a stick. Your stick will be musical references, like, constantly.
Well, then I'll have to be prepared for musical references. This is just...
Yeah, you're gonna need to have, like, a cheat sheet.
Yeah. But anyway, what I was trying to say is, you know, the concept of, like, Hamilton is the hot-headed, this is what's right, I'm going to do what I need to do.
Yeah.
Man of action versus Aaron Burr, who's characterized as man of thought and then, eventually.
Of measured action.
Yeah. And, like, that concept of, like, revolutions and things like that, like, I mean, obviously this is a completely different discussion, but I think it's interesting to think about on that level. Like, obviously people think things are right versus wrong, but where do you draw the line of, okay, this is so wrong that I will break the law to right that wrong. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It's like, I guess I'm sure it takes a certain kind of person, like, obviously. Oh. And we're back.
Hello.
Hi.
I lost you for a second.
As soon as you went offline. But obviously there's a type of person that would, you know, take that leap and take the risks. But there's also that kind of person who might be thinking and calculating ahead of time, like you were, like, okay, well, if we do this, then this bad thing is going to happen.
Yeah, it's a complicated situation.
Right.
Like, I know it will be right in this one exchange, but is it right because of all these other variables that I can't calculate? Then I'm just stressing out because life is hard.
Yeah. Like,
what are all the side effects of my action? Because this is going to get complicated real quick.
Well, yeah. I think it's important to think about consequence. You can't put it out of your mind, but I think you can't let it control all of your decisions.
Your life will just be really interesting.
That's true.
It's feasible. You'd be like, consequences, what are those? I just ended up in jail by the age of 10. I don't know how that happened.
Very true.
All right. So are there any other, like, meta discussions you want to have about the theory? We discussed whether or not we find it useful. We discussed, like, how it intertangles with real life. We discussed the intent of the theory. and whether or not it's true. Oh, did we talk about whether or not we think that this would be true in different time periods? I think quick.
We discuss it.
What?
I think you brought it up as far as like whether it's like a biological, like human stage development sort of thing versus something that.
I think we postponed it. I just want to get your answer. Do you think? Well, do you think these are vaguely accurate for our time period right now? Like, do you think these like kind of hold true to you? Like, it seems like a progression of someone developing in their moral understanding of the world.
I think I want to say yes.
So like,
but I also want to say I feel like there's more to morality, obviously, which is like kind of what Gilligan was saying with like the whole ethics of care concept. But I think there's more than just universal moral code, which is like stage 6, right? Like I feel like there should be more. Like there can be more, and I think that's like my major.
Do you think more as in like another stage? Do you think more as in like we were talking about earlier, it's more fluid and complex than a clean cut stage? Or do you think there's a stage 7 that he didn't list?
I think I wouldn't even necessarily say stage 7. I think I will agree that I definitely think it's very complex, and I do think it can be fluid in terms of situational situational situations. Yep. But I do
situational situations.
Yes. It's very quite many variables. But I do think that like this is, and I sort of touched on this earlier, like this is a very justice-centric.
That's true.
Concept of morality, and I think there's more to morality than just justice. And I think that I don't necessarily think that there might be a stage 7. Like I feel like 6 stages is good, easy to comprehend, breaks it down pretty easily with like 3 bigger subsections or headers, I guess, not subsections.
When you say there's something more than this, it's just in the framing of these stages, not necessarily like you think there's something beyond a universal principle stage.
Right, like this would be like, if this were like moral development, justice edition, then we have like moral development, like something else edition. Like, I mean, like relationships edition or like.
That's definitely a good naming scheme for these.
I think that Grace really touched on it about Gilligan, being that Gilligan didn't have her own moral model, but she looked into ethics about women and how they took relationships. So it's kind of like using Kohlberg's idea and then transcending it into different aspects of life.
Yeah, so the stages are good. It's the application that Kohlberg had a limited scope of, but the stages themselves, the concept of each area is pretty solid.
Right.
But then there's also a lot of criticism of Kohlberg being that he said that there is no stage skipping. So there's no bouncing back and forth. There's no idea of that in situations. Some people never even reach stage 6 ever in their whole lifetime. So they're lucky to even get to like the second part of moral development. And that's a huge criticism with people because they're like, morals aren't rigid. Like they're situational, they're values, a whole bunch of different things meshed into one.
Yeah. So I think that's interesting too, because when you say that, I realize like when I say that it's fluid, I do think ultimately that stage 6, like deep down, I believe is true. I just think that in day-to-day interaction, I might not be interacting with that deep principle all the time.
Right.
You know, so if you're like, what is right? I would say that what is actually right is a universal principle, but what I'm using to judge whether or not something is right is really fluid.
But are your morals your thoughts or what you want it to be? Or
I'm thinking like in a situation, how am I judging right or wrong? And I think that that's more fluid than what I truly internalize as right and wrong, right? Like what I'm using at the time might be because I'm lazy, right? But if I think of what actually is truly right or wrong, I would come back to a more universal principle. But then my measuring stick at the moment, I might be not feeling like applying the most accurate tool to the job.
Right. I guess
that's when it becomes fluid.
I guess what I'm thinking is there's that argument that like if you aren't consistently acting upon that deep, you know, value that you hold. Like, is that really something that you hold valuable?
There's actually a great bouncing off point to another episode we could do about this, about Good Samaritan and what you are responsible to do to help other people in the world, and what's reasonable. Because, like, it's unreasonable based on certain principles for you to be living in America at all. It's like an interesting, there's a lot to discuss there, and not set up in detail at all, but it's interesting because based on my principles, I should not buy new clothes and or drive a car or, you know, use my computer for recreational reasons, you know.
Right.
But there's also a, how much can you do before you break down and you're not able to support those principles at all, because there's an unreasonable expectation of, like, perfection that you can't achieve. So that's a discussion for another day, but it's very interesting.
Yeah, so that would have some really interesting real world application with, like, veganism and, like, ethically sourced food and all of that stuff.
So much. There's so much, and that's part of the discussion. Is there's more than a human can reasonably do to live up to the value of feeling like you need to help other people, even though I believe that you should help other people as much as you can. There's an interesting, at a certain point, because we're human, we can't help them because we've gone too hard trying to help them and then we burnt out.
Right. But then I guess that comes up to the argument of, is it in the little things or is it in the big things as far as helping the situations? But I guess that'll be a discussion for another time.
Yeah, it's a deep discussion that can go hours in and of itself. So we shouldn't touch on it right now.
Yes, definitely. But I think we can look forward to that in the future.
Yes, I think so. Pretty much, I would say that would be plenty of time. What was that? That's almost like an hour and a half.
Well, I think we actually started at like 7:30.
Yeah, so that would be like an hour and 10 minutes. That's pretty long.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, there are definitely places where we can probably cut some things.
That's true. Or rearrange.
Right, yeah.
But I think that's pretty cool. So our general structure is pretty much set something up, explain it before we get too in-depth, which was our first mistake. And then I feel like we can easily riff on a bunch of the implications, because there's just so many for a lot of these theories.
Yeah, I also think that we should limit a time, like give ourselves a time limit for summary and like setting up, like where it's comprehensive enough, but also isn't like a majority of the episode.
Yeah, I think those need to be pre-prepped, and the riffing is going to be the more organic part. And then I'll on my side, well, actually, if you're hosting, maybe on your side, someone should keep a timer that doesn't beep, but we know that we need to move on to the next stage of the podcast because we do want to have a mild time constraint. I think 45 minutes for the overall thing will keep us kind of concise and punchy and like let us draw out some of these discussions on more episodes.
Yeah.
But there's so much to talk about. I mean, it could go on for like hours.
Yeah, and I also think that like if we do find that we have an episode that is like an hour and a half, we can probably just slice it.
Oh,
Not
yeah.
like slice it, but like make it like a 2-part thing.
Yeah.
Like,
part 1 and part 2. Like, we'll come back to this next time. And we can even record it the same day. But it'll just be like a note for ourselves.
Yeah.
To not, like, if we don't really have an audience, but just to get in the mind of producing the show, like, we don't want them to have to listen to like a 2-hour podcast about riffing on the same subject.
Right, yeah.
So, like, take a break, audience. We'll see you next week.
Yeah, I think on what you're saying, like, I think it'd be helpful if we just, on those days that if we do want to do like multiple episodes, like I would just go through the discussion as is and then like maybe crop it somewhere and then insert some more audio that just says like, we're going to stop it here for this week, but there's more to discuss and we'll have, you know, a further discussion next week or whatever, you know?
There's that, or we could, if we do it where we're like, all right, we got 15 minutes to do our setup, like, or like 20 minutes to do our setup and our discussion of what the actual theory is, and then 40 minutes of just discussion, and by the 30-minute mark, we're going to wind down a summary of what we did that week. And then we start it up next week, except if it's a part 2, we just do like a 5-minute refresher. Say, listen to part 1, and then jump right into discussion for another 40 minutes. I think the advantage of that would be we get, if you're listening to the episodes, you get more, like, the conversation flows down to, like, all right, this is what we talked about, kind of organic ending. Kind of like what we did this time. Like, we had a more meta discussion about overall thoughts. So it has, like, a nice conclusion, and then you can restart again with some of the other stuff we didn't answer. But that would be a lot more work. The way you were talking about doing it would be much easier to do a double or triple episode and just like bang it out instead of like.
I mean, I don't know. We can still do it that way too. Like I'm saying, like if we do like a super long discussion on one topic, then just cut in like a summary, like decide where we're going to slice it. And then be like, and then record like another thing where it's like, okay, this is what we talked about. This is blah, blah, blah. As like the ending, even though it's like slightly less organic, it'll essentially do the same thing.
I see, yeah. So we would pretty much record 2 summaries, and we would just need to take note of where we're cutting it and what we need to summarize. So basically, we would decide where to cut it, look at what we covered so far, summarize our thoughts on that.
Yeah.
Cut that in. And then look at part 2, look at what's left, summarize our thoughts on that, and then a tiny bit of everything, and then cut that in at the end as well, because we need to look at it first.
Yeah, I think it's just a little bit more production, but we'll save a lot more time. And I think we'll keep the flow going as far as discussion goes. Like, the discussion itself won't be so broken, you know?
So hectic.
Don't break it. Yeah.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah, I like that. That's better than I thought you were just gonna be like, but like mid discussion is like,
all right, we're done.
Pause. All right, see you next week.
No, I meant like we would add stuff to it. Yeah, they wouldn't just be like, all right, we're cutting this here, continuing it later.
Okay, yeah, I like that. That works.
Cool beans.
Instead of being like, so, and it's like do. This will be continued to part 2 next week. See you there.
Yeah. That would be annoying. Alright. I feel good.
Yeah?
We could probably not be live.
It was a lot of fun. What's it going to be called?
Trey, what's this called? Trey said, philosophize this, but that's already a podcast, so we should do philosophize that.
That could be good. We might need our own identity, though.
Yeah, I don't know.
I like only referring to April as resident expert and never saying her name ever on the podcast.
Oh, I did say her name once, though.
But when we're actually doing the episodes, we need to be like, I'm Tim, this is Grace, and today we also have a resident expert on the subject, even if she has not talked about the subject before.
But then people will maybe think that she's a different person every time, but it's really just April every time.
Oh, yeah. Oh, we need to, like, alter her voice.
That'd be funny.
April, can you do different accents?
No.
April can totally do different accents every show.
I cannot.
And then, it would be good tongue-in-cheek, because people will know sometimes that April's not the expert. They'll clearly know when she's talking about the subject, when she sounds authoritative or not. Because when she's talking about something that she's actually studied, she's like has a much different like way of framing it.
As do most people.
As
they
do
know what
most
they're
people.
talking about.
Sorry.
Right.
What?
Oh, what are you gonna say?
I don't know. I'm trying to think of like a name.
Names are hard.
Ah.
We didn't come across any good names through our organic discussion.
No.
Which one was hoping.
I'm trying to think if there's like some sort of like famous philosophy or something like that that we can play on, do like a play on words or like something like that. I don't know.
Yeah, I think an indirect name that when you're like, why is it named that? And you explain it, they're like, oh.
Yeah.
I see. That'd be cool.
We'll figure it out.
Something like if like for example, it's not. But if our whole podcast was about the Heinz dilemma, we could be like ketchup philosophers or something. And they'll be like, why? And we're talking about Heinz.
51. 57. Just kidding. 57.
57. But that only works if like if Heinz was the first episode, maybe. But like I think our first episode should be what is philosophy and why.
Yeah, I think so too.
Why knowledge.
I'll research some stuff maybe.
Yeah, I think tongue in cheek is good to go for because we're gonna do research and know a little bit what we're talking about, but we're also gonna have personality.
Yeah, pizzazz.
We're gonna have pizzazz. Pizzazz makes me think of glitter for some reason.
We're gonna have glitter
everywhere. You'll listen to the podcast and you'll leave glitter on your ear. That does sound terrible. No one will listen.
That sounds terrible. I need to sneeze. I'm good.
Well, it almost sounded like you lost connection there. I was like, what a way to go. I need to sneeze. Achoo! Cut. That's
and I'm gone. All right. Well, I'm probably going to hop off and shower and go to bed.
Yeah, I have stuff I need to do, actually.
Cool. Sounds good.
Right.
This was fun. Sorry
it was a lot of
so long.
No, that's okay. I think it's probably going to take this long on the actual thing, but I think our podcast section should get slightly shorter.
Yeah, I think if we both do like our own personal preparation, so maybe like after we record a podcast on like a Saturday, like right after we'll be like, all right, this is what we're discussing next week. If you want to prepare anything, do it so in this week. And then, yeah.
And we have our topic for next week already.
Which is, can you remind me?
What is philosophy and knowledge? It's a big subject, but we're not covering all of it because that's huge. Yeah. But we're setting up a foundation of what exactly do we consider the thing we're talking about to be defined as.
Yeah. And this was just like a fun run, right? Or are we ever going to use this as a... Maybe we should like release this later on.
This is when we're famous. Maybe this is the very first... This is test -1. That's what it's called. It's literally named test -1.
Yeah. And then just release it to the public and let them know how it all started.
Yep. We're assuming we're going to become rockstar famous on a podcast.
We might.
What are max number of viewers for even like the most popular podcast? Like,
probably millions.
A million, yeah. Podcast's actually really popular. We could do it. All right.
Okay. Cool.
Cool. I will talk to you next Sunday.
Yeah. Do you want to keep it on Sundays, or do you want to keep it on, or do you want to do Saturdays?
Either or. Which one do you think would be more consistently like actionable for you?
I feel like I'm probably going to be more likely to be a blob on a Sunday.
I think if we did Sundays, we usually have like April and Steph and I and occasionally Jared have plans on Sunday nights for game nights, watching Game of Thrones, which is over now, and now watching Firefly. So that's like our like local friend group night. So if we do Sunday, it would be like Sunday morning or noon.
I could do that. Sunday morning. Sunday morning chats.
What's a modern fireplace?
Oh, instead of fireside chats. There is no that's still a fireplace. What do you mean a modern fireplace?
No, yeah. So what's the modern fireplace? What's the modern fireplace?
TV chats.
TV chats. I was thinking more little in the opposite direction. So, like, central air side.
Oh, more like little.
What's
Furnace chats.
Furnace side chats.
Yep.
AC side chats. Central heating, is that what what's like the, what do we have?
HVAC side chats.
HVAC side chats.
Yep.
I like that. It's very confusing. They'll think we're either presidential or an HVAC service.
Yeah, it'd be a terrible way to get new viewers, but
terrible SEO.
Yeah.
But hilarious. That should be our actual name. We're like, the name on this podcast is Philosophy Because Fun, but the actual name is HVAC Side Chats. We just don't think anyone would click on that. But now that you're here, that's what
we get a following, we can change it.
Yeah, well, we would say welcome to HVAC Side Chats.
That makes sense.
Thank you for joining, even though the link will be a totally different name.
Perfect. Throw people off.
They'll be very confused. We'd be like, but also stay, we're doing philosophy, not talking about
HVAC
systems.
Good. Okay.
Don't leave. That'll be the very first thing we say.
Don't leave. This isn't. Please no.
Please, we need the views.
Okay, cool.
All right. I'll let you go.
All right. Good night. Farewell.
Good night.
Auf Wiedersehen. And all
Ciao.
that.
Arrivederci.